Okay, we will continue with Chapter 5. I'm going to talk about some legal aspects of intentional torts, things that we're doing intentionally now to harm another person. So defamation is injuring name and reputation. So you start false rumors about someone, okay, where it can actually injure their reputation. You can be sued for defamation, false imprisonment, unlawful restraint, and we'll talk about that in more detail here in a little bit. Invasion of privacy, getting into their private emails, phone messages, their charts when you shouldn't be in there. And I will tell you that, and we'll be learning this as we go through charting and the legalities of things, that when you're taking care of someone, I told you that you only have the right to be in somebody's chart, that you need to know that information. So there has been many cases where there have been people, like famous people are admitted to a hospital, for instance. And, everybody's curious. I mean, if you knew that your favorite basketball player was a patient on another floor, you'd kind of want to know. So you'd go up and say, hey, how's so-and-so doing? I heard he was here. Or, I just want to look in their chart. You never want to do that. For one thing, especially when there's famous people or well-known people, facilities run audits. So most facilities now do electronic charting, which we'll be talking about in a little bit in another session. But electronic charting, we used to do good old pen and paper, writing everything down, and now we tend to, of course, we chart in electronic format in nursing homes and in hospitals. You will be given a code to log into that computer, and every entry you put into that computer with your code is basically your electronic signature. So you go into that a person's chart that you didn't need to be into. You didn't need to know that famous basketball player, what his diagnosis was, what was going on with him. You were just curious. You didn't mean any harm by it. You weren't planning on selling the information to the newspaper or anything, but you got into that chart when you didn't need to be in it. Your passcode is going to be stamped that you got into that chart. And especially when there's well-known people there, the facilities run audits off of those charts, every day to see who's been getting into that chart. And if you've been getting in that chart and you had no need to be in there, it's grounds for termination. Okay. I mean, and when you go on for your RN license, it's grounds for having being reprimanded from the Board of Registered Nursing. So this is something you have to think about here. You don't get into people's charts and things if you don't need to be in there. Fraud, which is tricking, fooling, or deceiving someone. Now, assault is threatening bodily harm. Battery is physically harming someone. So let's say you're falling asleep in class and I threaten to hit you with a wet noodle. That would be assault. If I actually took the wet noodle and started beating you, then it would be battery, okay? Now, we tend to think of assault and battery lumped together, but they actually are two separate things, okay? Threatening bodily harm is illegal, okay? And it is a form of abuse. Same with battery, okay? Actually touching them, harming them without consent. As far as protecting the right to privacy, again, I know we keep bringing this up, but it is very, very important. Confidentiality and HIPAA. HIPAAs are Health Information Portability Protected Act. Sometimes I get my P's a little mixed up, but there's lots of different ways we provide privacy. So no, we don't get into charts that we don't need to be in. But there's other ways we protect privacy as well. Windows, doors, we shut the door when we're in doing a procedure for the patient. We pull the privacy screens when we're caring for someone. I always tell my students, always make sure when you're going in to take care of that person, look all the way around the room. Sometimes they pull the privacy curtain and then they don't realize that over on the other side where there's this window and there's no curtain pulled over it and people walking from the outside could look in. And so you need to be careful with that. We only expose the body part we're involved in with the care. So, for instance, we'll learn that when we're bathing a patient, we'll cover them up with a bath blanket. Even though we've shut the door, even though we pulled the privacy curtain, we're going to also cover them up with a bath blanket. That's for warmth, but it's also for privacy. And we'll uncover the body part that we're cleaning or, that we're working with at that time. Don't talk with someone else about your patient. Again, if a person doesn't have the need to know, you don't give them information. We need to have, it's okay to ask visitors to leave the room when we're giving care. Now, sometimes a visitor might ask, oh, can I stay while you do this? That is up to the resident themselves. So you have to say, that's up to Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Is it okay if your daughter stays with you? Or I could just have them step out for a little bit, get them cleaned up, and then have them come back in. That is going to be up to the resident. But it is okay to ask a visitor to leave while you're giving care. Now, one thing just to keep in mind with this, though, is please realize that some of these residents don't get visitors very often. So if you, let's say you have to give your patient a bath and their family members just came in, I'm not going to ask them to step out and leave when they just got there to visit their loved one. And a lot of times what happens is when you go in and ask a visitor if they could step out for a little bit so you can get the person cleaned up and say, oh, well, this isn't a good time to visit, so I'll just leave. And the resident's just going to be just crushed. So generally, when I find that a resident has visitors, and I know I need to give care, I'll usually, I'll knock on the door, I'll ask to come in, I introduce myself, and I'll just ask them, oh, I said, I'm so nice that you have a visitor. I know how much you enjoy that. How long are you planning on being here? So I know how to plan, Mr. and Mrs. Smith's care. So, if they're like, oh, I'm only going to be here an hour, then I'll come back in an hour and get that person cleaned up. There's no reason I can't do that. If they're planning on being there all day, then I'll just say, I will have you step out just for a little bit while I, get them cleaned up, and then I can have you come right back in. So there's ways to do that so we don't disrupt the chance for that resident to have a visitor. We do not open up someone else's mail. You have no right to get in your residents' mails, ever. So now sometimes if you have a patient who doesn't have good dexterity, they might ask you to open something up for them. That's okay. But otherwise, you don't automatically open up someone else's mail. We allow people to use their phone in private. Don't leave charts unattended. And we'll be talking a lot about documentation and charting, whether there's an electronic chart or there's a physical paper style chart. We do not leave charts unattended outside that nurse's station. So you're going to find that the charts are kept at the nurse's station. If you use a chart and you take it out of the nurse's station, you have to make sure you don't leave it and set it somewhere and then walk off. You always have to make sure it goes back where it belongs. And if you're doing electronic charting, you always make sure you log off. You don't leave the computer screen open where other people could be seeing it. The other thing is we do not take pictures in the facilities. You do not take pictures in the facility, period. Okay? Well, okay, I say period. We did have this happen one time. The activities director asked one of my students if she could take some pictures of the group activities. And fortunately, the student came and talked to me, and I just said no. But had she been the regular CNA, she would have had to have gotten permission from every one of those people that they were wanting the picture taken from. You cannot take a picture of someone in a nursing home unless every person that's in that picture has agreed to it and understands what the picture is for. So I'm going to just tell you our policy at the school. You do not take pictures in the nursing home. Even if the family member says, oh, take a picture of me and my mom, just say, I'm not allowed to do that. Let me go get the regular staff or the social worker. Because there's a lot of legalities involved. And I will tell you, sometimes you're going to see really interesting things. And this has happened before. We've had nurses have taken pictures of like really unusual wounds or unique wounds, and they didn't have the patient's face in there, and they didn't have identifying information in there. But because this wound was so unique, people were still able to figure out potentially who it was. That is a HIPAA violation. Again, it's grounds for termination. It's grounds for having, things, having CDPH or the Board of Registered Nursing take legal action against you. So just don't ever put yourself in that place. You don't take pictures. You don't ever post anything on a social media site. You don't do it. Okay, you're going to work too hard to get your CNA, and I know many of you are doing this to go on for the RN program. You work too hard to get into nursing to lose that, ability because you did something like take a picture and post it on a social media site. Just don't even do it. Electronic communications, email, text, faxes, social media sites, computers, pictures have been cause of defamation, invasion of privacy, HIPAA violations, violating confidentiality, unprofessional. Grounds for termination, loss of license, lawsuits. Just don't do it. Don't be tempted. Now, as far as informed consent goes, informed consent we get when doctors are going to do a procedure. So when, let's say they're going to be doing an invasive procedure, or if you're in the hospital, they're doing surgery, doctors are responsible for informing the person about the aspects of their care. So informed consent is when the person clearly understands what's being done, why it's being done, the potential risks involved with it, potential side effects or complications that could happen, other possibilities, other forms of treatment. So the person needs to be 18 years old and mentally competent. They cannot have dementia. They cannot have loss of cognitive function. They cannot be mentally disabled. CNAs are not responsible to obtain written consent. Now, physicians and nurses, licensed nurses can do that. Now, it is, as a CNA, legally, you can actually witness a will depending on the agency's policy, but the facilities that we go to, again, I'm going to tell you if someone asks you to witness a will, we're going to tell you to just check with the regular staff, to just go check with the nurse or the social service department at the facility where we're at. Now, as far as reporting abuse goes, we're going to be learning how to report abuse. We're going to actually watch a video on our legal duty to report. But abuse is the intentional mistreatment or harm of another person, and it is a crime. It is willfully causing injury, unreasonable confinement, intimidation, punishment, depriving the person of the needs that they have. OBRA does not allow agencies to employ people who are convicted of abuse, neglect, or mistreatment. So I'm going to tell you right now, if you get accused of abuse, hopefully when it gets investigated, they're going to find out that there was actually no cause for it and you didn't do this. If you get convicted of abuse, you will probably never work again in nursing. So you want to make sure that you do nothing that can potentially be seen as abuse or neglect or mistreatment. Now, different types of abuse. There is physical abuse, hitting, punching, kicking, and that can be sexual abuse as well. Can actually is kind of like a subsection of physical abuse. Unwanted sexual acts, forced nudity, harassing people about sex. Now, remember when we talked about harassing, it's not always women that are harassed. Men can be harassed as well. It is tormenting or making someone feel uncomfortable about it. It could be pictures that you're showing. It could be stories that you're telling. If it's making someone uncomfortable because you're talking about sexual things in the workplace, it can be grounds for termination and it can be considered harassment. Forced to watch sexual acts or taking sexual photos. Another type of abuse we see is emotional or psychological abuse. Belittling them, making them feel bad, making them feel like they're not worthy is another type of abuse. Now, neglect is different than negligence. So we talked about negligence and we said that negligence was not doing what a person with the same type of background would do. So you move someone who shouldn't have been moved after a car accident, and a reasonable person probably wouldn't have done that. That is negligence. Neglect is different. Neglect is purposely not feeding someone who's hungry, not clothing someone who needs to be clothed, not cleaning someone who needs to be cleaned. That is neglect. And that is purposeful and intentional, and that is abuse. And we're going to pause right here.